Welcome to Astrology Night. This is for June 2015. Here we are at SoulFood Coffeehouse in Redmond, Washington. For all of you who are here, you know where we are. But for those of you watching on the internet, we do this the first Wednesday night of every month here at our gracious hosts at SoulFood Coffeehouse. We have an interesting month ahead, but then again, that's part of what I'm supposed to say every month to keep your attention. Before we jump into the business at hand, I wanted to spend a couple of minutes telling you about some upcoming events. And I want to start off telling you about an amazing opportunity that we all have to experience astrology in Bali. This is actually going to be sponsored by Heaven and Earth Workshops. They put on workshops in Bali, Mexico, UK, and India. And I've had the privilege of doing a number of workshops. Jeff and I have done workshops for them in Indonesia and in Mexico. This one is going to be let's try that again. Mercury is retrograde. This one is going to be an initiation to the experience of astrology, and it's going to be a celebration of the life and work of my now departed astrology partner, Jeff Jower. It's going to be quite an event. I've taught one 8-day workshop there myself. Jeff and I have done, I think, 4 over the past decade or so. And by the way, all these photographs are photographs that I took in Bali. And this particular workshop is going to be on September 20th through the 28th. That's this year, 2015. And it's going to be in a small rural village of Bayad, just outside of Ubud, which is the cultural capital of Indonesia. Anyone here been to Bali?
Not yet.
Yeah, okay. Well, you guys know. What we're going to be focusing on, often astrology is what I call a cerebral study. It often occurs in our throat chakra and higher. And part of what the Bali workshop retreat is going to be bringing the stars down to earth. And one of the themes that we're going to be working with is what I like to call a pocket full of planets. And that is, the planets aren't just out there. There is a Mars up there and a Jupiter up there, but the fact of the matter is that all these planets are within us also, and we carry them around in our pockets all the time. And if we know what planet does what and how to work with the energy, we can conjure up Jupiter when we need to feel bigger or better or stronger, and we can conjure up Venus when we want to be more charming or more loving or more vulnerable. And so we'll be working with this concept, a pocket full of planets. We'll be doing quite a bit with experiential astrology. Actually, instead of just lecturing from the podium as I'm doing tonight, actually working integrated with the energy and experiencing the planets directly. We will be incorporating astrodrama. We'll use masking tape and make a large 30-foot wheel, a zodiac wheel, on the floor where we'll be working, so that we'll actually stand in our own charts and have people playing the planets in our charts real time, having our dialogues as if they're going on in our head, but we'll be working with them and I'll be facilitating that. Astrodrama is absolutely fantastic. If you've never experienced it, it really takes your working with your own chart to a whole different level. And we'll be a small enough group that will actually be working with all the charts of all the participants. The group will probably be about 15 to 20 people, and at that number we'll all get plenty of individual attention. We'll also integrate what I like to call the Bali experience, meaning that when we're doing Venus, we're going to have a cooking class that we'll go to, a real Balinese cooking class. When we're working with the moon, I have a picture of this later, we'll go to a Hindu temple and do a full immersion in a holy spring and be blessed by the Hindu priests at this lunar. It'll be on a full moon, that particular event. For Mars, we'll experience the Ketchak fire dance, which you really get that feeling of the heat of Mars. And there will be time during the 8-day workshop. There'll be one dark day where you'll have the entire day off to go to the beach or to go shopping. And it's at that time of year where I would recommend anyone who is coming brings one suitcase, no clothes, okay, maybe a couple of pair of underwear, but no socks, no extra shirts or pants or skirts, because you'll buy, the first day there, you'll buy whatever you need because it's too cheap. And you want to come with a soft suitcase, like a duffel to put in your larger suitcase, because when you go home, you'll go home with both of them full, and you can do all your Christmas shopping and probably pay for your trip. It's the tropics. It's on the equator, actually 8 degrees south. By the way, this is a picture of the Ketchak fire dance. There'll be a couple of other pictures coming up. The beaches are amazing. We'll be in the rice paddies. This is a picture of the rice paddies just flooded. This is another picture of the fire dance. This one evening, this is an astrology group. We had dinner on the beach at the sunset. It was a magnificent evening. This is a picture of the full moon temple holy water immersion. And actually, you can see Jeff right there. And I took the picture, so I'm not in it. And this is the temple, the priest who did the blessing afterwards. Part of what we will be doing during the week is we will also have a custom ceremony that will be done by a local village priest, because Jeff taught there. They're willing to do a ceremony for Jeff. And so we will actually incorporate that into the week also. It's going to be an amazing week. Just some other random shots of some of the amazing things in Bali. There I am actually walking across the rice fields, and that's Jeff and I on our previous trip there. So the deal is, by the way, that is Mount Agung, and that is one of the 2 active volcanoes on the island. The deal is that registration will be limited. If you're thinking about going, get a deposit in, or at least talk to Evelyn. Evelyn is the person who puts the workshop on. There'll be information available if you go to stariq.com, stariq.com/Bali, and it'll take you to the site that has all the details. Right now, airfares are cheaper to Bali than they are to Europe. Europe right now is running $1,200 to $1,500 depending upon where you're going. From Seattle, Bali right now is about $850. I don't know why. From LA, it's $790 right now. Don't know how long these are going to last, but once you're there, it's pretty damn cheap. So thank you for your attention on this. That's the short version of Bali. It's going to be amazing. I only know this because the previous 4 times that we've been there, it's been amazing. Just a couple of other quick dates. One is that on the summer solstice on June 19th and 20th, I'm going to be in Minneapolis at the NCGR chapter there. NCGR is the National Council for Geocosmic Research. It's one of the main non-profit professional astrology organizations. And I will be there doing a Friday night lecture and an all-day Saturday workshop for the listeners online who happen to be in the Minneapolis area. On Wednesday, August 5th, I'll be back at Lilydale. That's the home of the American Spiritualist Church. And that'll be a Wednesday night talk. And if you're in the Buffalo or Finger Lakes region or Pittsburgh in the western part of New York State, that'll be on August 5th. OPA, the Organization for Professional Astrology, has its annual retreat at Asilomar. It's a magical retreat center on the beach, south of Monterey, south of Santa Cruz and Monterey, and on the California coast. And this is going to be October 22nd through 25th. So if you can't justify a week or two in Bali, come on down to the OPA conference, and you can find more out about that online at opaastrology.com. And then I will be in Austin, Texas on the weekend of November 21st, 22nd. That's the weekend before Thanksgiving, and that will be lecturing and teaching for the Astrology Society of Austin. Okay, enough from the Department of Crass Materialism, and now on to the month ahead. So, the good news is May is over. So did May suck a little bit for some people? Some people had a great May? All right, great. No, I mean, there are good parts and bad parts of every month. But May astrologically was a relatively tough month. And I have heard story after story after story of people running into kind of just lots of little things. We're not talking huge life-altering things necessarily, but lots of stuff that's been happening in May. And I think the largest culprit here is the fact that Mercury turned retrograde on May 18th and is still retrograde today. And in fact, for those of you who are here tonight rather than online, you know that we fiddled for about 20 minutes trying to get a loose connection or a faulty connection in the wire going from the computer to the screen that could blip out at any time. And so this was a typical Mercury retrograde kind of a quirk in reality. We'll talk more about Mercury retrograde in a moment. But I want to just kind of ground us in this month, although quite frankly, it's not a very grounded month. I think that by the middle of the month, things really start to move forward, and we're in a whole new territory, a whole new domain by the end of the month. But in some ways, the first week or two of June might as well still be May. There's a feeling of that, and this is because Mercury, which turns retrograde 3 times a year for about 3 weeks at a time, and last month I went into this in a much deeper manner. I'll just touch on it this evening, and that is that Mercury takes about 90 days, 88 days actually, to go around the Sun. And it's between us and the Sun. And so 3 times a year, Mercury catches up to Earth and comes between the Earth and the Sun. And as it does, as it gets closer and closer to Earth, we lose perspective. Earth is moving faster than Mercury, and it looks like it's going backwards in the sky. Doesn't really, but it definitely, the energy is amped and tweaked a bit. There's nothing inherently bad about a Mercury retrograde. It just brings communication issues to the forefront, because it's like having something cooking on the stove and you stir it once every half hour because it's simmering on slow cook, and then someone turns it up to high. And if you don't stir it every 3 minutes, it burns, or maybe even constantly. If you walk away, it's not pretty. And so what happens during Mercury retrograde is the issues that normally we can leave unattended all of a sudden become so blown out of proportion that we have to pay constant attention to what we're saying, what we're hearing, to checking out our thoughts. Did we misunderstand that? We hear a direction, we may make a wrong turn, we hear left when someone said right, we misdial. All kinds of weird things do happen when Mercury is in retrograde. However, nothing is inherently wrong with retrograde. What's inherently wrong is we get sloppy because the noise level goes up. So we start the month with Mercury still in retrograde. In astrology, every planet relates to a sign, and every sign relates to a planet. Mercury, many planets relate to 2 signs. Mercury relates to Gemini when it's a morning star, and to Virgo when it's an evening star. So right now, the Sun for this month is in the sign of Gemini. It moved into Gemini, back in the last week and a half of May, around the 19th of May. and it will remain in Gemini until the 21st of June on the summer solstice. We'll get to that in a few minutes. So for most of June, the Sun is in Mercury's sign, Gemini. Gemini is about sending and receiving information. Gemini is noisy. In astrology, Gemini relates to siblings, brothers and sisters. Why? Because when you grow up in a household of kids, the kids' chitter-chatter is irrelevant to anything really important. It's noise. It fills the space with data, with information. I think of Gemini as the sending and receiving of all information, whether or not it's important. The key here is whether or not it's important. Virgo, the other Mercury sign, says, get rid of all the shit that ain't important. I only want the stuff that's useful. Gemini doesn't care about useful. Gemini just likes the noise. So, when the Sun is in Gemini, it's almost like we all become honorary Geminis a little bit. We tend to just kind of have more noise in our lives, more activity, more busyness. We may not get anything done, but the key here is that Gemini's key or ruling planet Mercury is going backwards, or at least it appears that way, until the 11th. And so that energy is even amped up more. And on top of that, if we look at a chart for tonight, this is yesterday, June 3rd, we have the Sun in the sign of Gemini, but the Sun is sandwiched in between Mercury, which has moved backwards in Gemini, and Mars in Gemini. So Mercury is the planet of communication. Mars is the planet of physical energy. When Mercury and Mars are hanging out together, we can get angry, or people can get angry at us because there's that direction, there's that fieriness, that feistiness. And in fact, with the Sun right in the middle, this becomes a very important scenario. And in fact, just yesterday, we had the full moon in Sagittarius opposite the Sun and Mercury and Mars, with Neptune at right angles. Neptune is the spacey planet. It's the dreamy planet. And so what this suggests is that this month got off to a start with a lot of stuff going on, and each of us may, in fact, in our own world, be a bit dazed and confused. We don't necessarily have it all together. We may have vision, but we may not really know what we're doing or how we're going to do it. We're kind of all rolling with the punches a bit and waiting until the energy settles down. And in fact, when Mercury, we'll follow Mercury over the next week or so, because Mercury until the 11th continues to move backwards. Actually, I'm going to move this a day ahead at a time and just watch here Mercury. Now it's 7 degrees of Gemini. We watch Mercury, and that Mercury goes back to 6 and back to 5 and back to 4. And on June 11th, Mercury goes back as far as it's going to go, and then it turns around and it starts moving forward again. We're just watching Mercury. All the other planets are moving at their own speed. But you see how Mercury is now moving forward? And in fact, if we keep moving this forward, Mercury will eventually catch back up with the Sun and move on to the other side of the Sun. We're already now in mid-July, but you see there goes Mercury, and it's now on the other side of the Sun. Got it? All right, let's go back to now, which is June 3rd. And so here we are with all these planets, Mercury, the Sun, and Mars in Gemini, amping up the noise. We may have just more routines to deal with, more things to take care of. With Mercury Retrograde, we're often dealing with things, as I am, of expired license tabs. Whoops. Had that happen. You see, the wonderful thing about Mercury Retrograde is that we astrologers, for 3 weeks at a time, 3 times a year, we have like the universal scapegoat. Anything that goes wrong, it's Mercury Retrograde. You know, the computer messes up, it's Mercury Retrograde. You know, someone calls you and you missed the phone call and it's really important, it was Mercury Retrograde. Now that same kind of stuff happens all the time. But when Mercury is retrograde, astrologically, we have a good excuse. So, one of the key things that's happening over the next few days is that Venus, which is way ahead of the Sun right now, Venus, like Mercury, has a retrograde pattern. Because like Mercury, it's inside the orbit of the Earth, and it goes around the Sun, but it doesn't move as fast. It's not as close in as Mercury is. And so it retrogrades less often. It catches up to the Earth only every other year. And so Venus's retrograde is rare. And Venus will be turning retrograde this summer. And I'm only mentioning it now. We'll talk more about this next month. But I'm mentioning it now because Venus on June 5th moves into Leo, and normally Venus spends about 3 weeks or so, 3 or 4 weeks maybe or so in a sign. However, because Venus is slowing down and then is going to turn retrograde, Venus is going to be in Leo. She moves into Leo. Watch this on the screen here. Here's Venus. Venus moves into Leo on June 5th. And she pretty much stays in Leo for the following 4 months. This is playtime. Leo is a party sign. It's about having fun. It's about coming from the heart. Leo is exuberant energy that is basically childlike and playful. It's the Tom Robbins line from Still Life with Woodpecker. It's never too late to have a happy childhood. Venus moves into Leo. It's been in Cancer for the last month, and as such, our nurturing, what we like, what we desire. Venus is what we're attracted to. In Cancer, there's kind of this, I call it the Klingon effect. We want to hold on. We want to cling on to that which we love. We want to nurture. We want to care for and be cared for. When Venus moves into Leo, all of a sudden we feel like, there's a light out, and it's our love light, and we want to shine it. And the fact that Venus pretty much stays in Leo all the way through the first week of October is extraordinary. Now, it does dip into Virgo on July 18th, and then back into Leo on July 31st. So for a couple of weeks toward the end of July, Venus it works its way through Leo, it touches into Virgo, and then it retrogrades back. Point being that the big shift of Venus occurs on June 5th. And if you have your love antenna peeled and kind of aimed toward the sky, you might get a sense of what that's about. Okay, so Venus moves into Leo on June 5th. Important. And it will be there for what will seem like forever. Meanwhile, however, we still have all these planets back in Gemini doing that Gemini tap dance. Mercury turns direct on June 11th, and over the next few days there's a sequence of very important things. Mercury turns direct on June 11th, and let's move this up to June 11th, because that's the day that Mercury turns direct. And over the next couple of days, we have a few things that are very interesting. One of the things is I want to point out how closely the Sun and Mars are tracking. Let's just come back to here right now. Here we are on June 3rd. And the Sun is at 12 degrees, Mars is at 15 degrees, which means they're about 3 degrees apart. They're moving at pretty close to the same rate right now. The Sun is moving a little bit faster. And you see they actually catch up with each other, and the Sun gets to the other side. You see how they change sides? On June 13th, 14th. But what's happening is that for about the next week and a half or so, Mars and the Sun are tracking very, very closely. Mars, feisty, fiery, it's the warrior planet. Mars is assertion and aggression. What's the difference? Well, aggression is too much assertion. Mars is how we defend our territory, and it's also how we push our way into new territory. We all do this. We all have Mars. Some of us do it better than others. Some of us do it so well that we become a general in the military, which may not be well at all. It may be aberrated, but we may find a place to express our Mars. On the sports field is a place where we can express our Mars. Other people have Marses that are more gentle, and maybe it's the heat of Mars that you make in the kitchen, which can also be Marsy when you're cooking and firing stuff up. So there's different ways to express each of these planets. Mars, when it lines up with the Sun, it's almost like our will. The Sun is our consciousness. It's our heart center, if you will. And when Mars is lined up with the Sun, as it does for a week or so, or 2 weeks here, about, it does that every other year. And so it's not a very common thing. And when Mars is lined up with the Sun, we can feel more pushy. We feel more a sense of like, oh my God, I got to do it now. I got to take care of it. We may be feeling that already, especially with Mercury Retrograde. It often kind of gives us that sense of immediacy. If I don't do something right now, I may never get to do it. And then you go ahead and do it, and you go, shit, I shouldn't have done it. because the sense of urgency is a bit falsified. It's bent out of shape. The planets actually bend us out of shape. They warp us. They warp reality. I think Einstein actually said that mass is just gravitationally trapped light, and that time is actually warped space. He didn't even do drugs that we know of. Yeah, well, he was a Pisces. He didn't have to. So, Mars lined up with the Sun for much of the first part of the month is really important. It's not that we should try to bury it, because planets need to express that which we suppress, which means we know we're doing it, or that which we repress, which means it's unconscious and we don't know we're doing it. That which we suppress or repress is projected. And so we bump into people who piss us off. Or we bump into someone who's doing dumb stuff that we just want to punch out, but we can't. That's because we have to find ways to move the energy. It's in Gemini. There is movement to it. Dance, ecstatic dancing, movement, yoga, running, anything that keeps the energy moving over the next week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Maybe that's always good. But at this time it's particularly useful because that energy wants to bottle up because there's too much of it. Whenever there's too much of any energy astrologically, we want to hold it in. We're afraid that things will fall apart if we express it. That's why Mercury retrogrades are problematic. Or Venus retrogrades, as we talk about that next month. The fact is that when a planet gets too hot or too energized, it doesn't fit in, so we hold it back. And as soon as we hold it back, we create a ripple, and we create that ripple, and all of a sudden we're dealing with a problem that looks like it's out there, but it's really in here. So, with Mars lining up with the Sun for the next couple of weeks, it's really important that we keep thinking about how we can keep the energy moving. Next important thing for this month, and that is Saturn. Saturn is a 29-and-a-half-year cycle. It's the over 30, under 30, syndrome. It's the, grow up, be responsible in your 30s. Saturn is karmic. Saturn is Satan. Etymologically, it's the same word. It's just Satan is Saturn from a Judeo-Christian value judgment. If you're born of original sin, the outcome always sucks. You're going to be punished. Saturn says you get what you deserve. Saturn is karma. You get what you deserve. But we come from a culture that has kind of pushed Saturn into this place of problem, of damnation, of devil. In fact, there's a very well-known astrology book written almost 30 years ago, almost a Saturn cycle ago, written by a Jungian psychologist named Liz Green, and the name of the book is Saturn, A New Look at the Old Devil. See, if Jeff was here, And I guess he is, because now I'm saying it. I find myself often saying things that I know Jeff would say because we worked together for so long. Jeff would say, but because most people say Saturn is resistance, and it is. Saturn says no. Saturn says you can't. Saturn says you have to wait. Saturn says get it together before you go forward. Saturn is the cosmic naysayer. And Jeff would say, yeah, but Saturn's the planet that says no but means yes. And he doesn't mean that from a sexual point of view of like no means no. What he means is that Saturn says no because Saturn is the teacher, it's the taskmaster. When Saturn is operating on our side, Saturn is slowing us down so that we do it right, so we learn, so we get the degree, so we do the practice. So we do what we need to do rather than just glossing over the top and thinking that we can go ahead. Often we run off a cliff or run into a wall because we're not prepared or because we don't know, we haven't looked at the map. Saturn says look at the map, look at causal relationships. Saturn's about cause and effect. Why are we talking about Saturn? Well, Saturn spends about 2.5 years in each sign. And when Saturn is in that sign, it takes on a nature of that sign. For the past couple of years, Saturn was moving through the sign of Scorpio. Let me get some dates here for you, because I can't remember all this shit. I used to, when I was your age, however old you are. So Saturn moved into Scorpio back in the fall of 2012. 2 years later, just a couple days before Christmas, actually the day before Christmas Eve, that's true, okay, on December 23rd, Saturn left Scorpio and moved into Sagittarius. Many people in the astrological world took a sigh of relief. Why? Because Saturn's the taskmaster. Scorpio is the sign of intensity. It's the sign of transformation, of deep unconscious transformational metamorphosis. Scorpio is what happens beneath the surface. Scorpio is emotional power and transformation. When Saturn is in Scorpio, we all had to do some heavy shit. We all had to do some processing of stuff that was perhaps deeper. And if you happen to have been if you are a Scorpio, or have a moon in Scorpio, or Scorpio rising, then as Saturn moved through your sign, you got the extra weight of Saturn saying, you're getting what you're deserving, it's probably good and bad, but you got to deal with the stuff and kind of make decisions and take it to the next step. When Saturn moved into Sagittarius, all of a sudden the pressure was off the most pressurized sign of the zodiac, Scorpio. And in Sagittarius, Saturn basically said, we now need to work on giving structure, that's Saturn, to the big picture. What's ahead? What's way out there? When you look off and see the horizon, when you see the tops of trees or the tops of mountains, that's Sagittarius, the archer, shooting the arrow into the sky, the thoughts reaching out way beyond where the details of what's known are right here and right now. Saturn moves into Sagittarius and we begin to think about the future in a different way. We begin to structure a life plan. But here's the trick of the zodiac. Saturn moved into Sagittarius on December 23rd, 2014, and Saturn turned retrograde back in March. Because all planets, all true planets, turn retrograde. Saturn and the outer planets just turn retrograde once a year, but for several months at a time. Saturn is now retrograde in early, very early degrees. You can see actually right now, let's bring this back, well, even on June 13th, Saturn is just at 0 degrees of Sagittarius, and on June 14th, Saturn backs into, whoop, I'm going the wrong way here, there we go. On June 14th, by the 15th, Saturn is back into Scorpio. All right, you Scorpios, you ain't done yet. None of us are done yet. All those things that we were working on, the hidden stuff, the deep stuff, the transmutational, psychological processes, we get another round of remedial study. Saturn is back in Scorpio from June 14th through September 17th. So June into July, August, September, we have 3 months of Saturn tipped back into Scorpio. It doesn't really ever get comfortable back there. It's a temporary situation. However, we may find ourselves looking at issues from a year or so ago that we thought were already dealt with and done, but now we're kind of giving it a last round of thinking or of processing. So this is a big piece of this month of Saturn moving back into Scorpio. And that happens, like I said, on June 14th, by the 14th, 15th, late on the 14th, actually. All right. So by the 15th, we have Saturn retrograded back into Scorpio. We have Venus now well into Leo, and we have Mercury now moving direct. And Mercury will, over the next few weeks, by the end of the month and on into July, Mercury will catch back up with the Sun. So Mercury, this is the turning point of mid-June, where we begin to actually see light at the end of the tunnel. Yes, Saturn is holding us, it's a bit of an anchor, and yet we're kind of moving forward, our thoughts are moving forward again, and we're beginning to get some traction. Incidentally, on the 14th, that's the day that Mars also exactly lines up with the Sun. So that period of the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th is a real turning point, and it's a point in which we can all look at what's going on in our lives and consciously realize that although we may not be where we want to be yet, that the turning point aspect of what's going on is actually quite important. So as the planets move on, the next major change that occurs is on the summer solstice. And some people say solstice, some people say solstice. They are both correct. You say tomato, and I say deadly nightshade. Okay, tomato is a nightshade. Okay, so there are 4 points during the year that mark the calendar that create what we call the zodiac. You may have heard someone say, "Oh, astrology, they don't even know where the planets are. The signs have changed." Well, this has to do with a wobbling of the Earth. That's a 25,000, almost 26,000 year cycle. And the fact of the matter is that we astrologers, the signs of the zodiac are not named after where the stars are positioned in the sky. They're named after the seasons. When on the first day of spring, on the vernal equinox, the spring equinox, equinox is when day and night is equal dark, equal light, all over the planet. That's a marker, and that's the day the Sun moves into the sign of Aries. Because of the tilt of the Earth, as the Earth is going around the Sun, it looks like the Sun drops down low in the sky in the winter, and then it looks like it comes up in the sky in the summer until it's as far north as it gets, and then it stands still. It looks like it stands still, and then it goes back down towards autumn, where it's moving quickly until the first day of winter on December 21st, when again it's standing still, and then it comes back up. These standing still points are the solstices. Sol, sun, stis, still. The sun is still. That's all a solstice is. It's 2 times a year when the sun appears not to move. We're not talking about its daily motion because of the Earth's spin. We're talking about how high and against the horizon that it gets at noon. In the wintertime at noon, the sun's only like there, here in Seattle. But in the summertime, it's like up there. If you're on the equator, it's different because the sun can be directly overhead. Now, the summer solstice is the point in the zodiac where 0 degrees of Cancer is defined. Cancer is the sign associated with the beginning of summer. Cancer means crab. A crustacean is a cancer. The name of the disease actually etymologically comes from the fact that when one of the distinguishing things about a crab is that when it grabs onto something, it doesn't let go. Any Cancers in the room or Cancer suns or moons? I have a Cancer moon or ascendants. All right. It's been said that Cancerian people are like crabs in a few very specific crab-like things. One is they hold on to the past with great tenacity. Tenacity is a great Cancerian word. They're loyal. Why? Because they hold on to what they think is important. A crab can reach into a crevasse and grab food like a kid reaching into a cookie jar, grabbing a handful of cookies. And if the opening is small enough that the hand can go in, but filled with its food, it can't come out, most kids will eventually let go and pull their hand out. The crab, however, will lose the arm. Think about that in your life or in the life of crabs, of Cancerians that you know. Cancerians will hold on to stuff even when it's useless, even when it's harmful. So this is an important piece of what happens as the sun moves into Cancer. We all go into that place of holding on to the past. Nostalgia is a great Cancerian word. The other thing about crabs is that because of their big pinchers, their claws or pinchers that are in front of them, they can't move forward very quickly. So if a crab needs speed, it goes backwards or sideways. And the same can be said of Cancerian people. And that is that Cancer, the best lesson that I ever had learning about the sign of Cancer was sitting at Sunset Cliffs one day in San Diego at the top of the cliff, sunny day, looking over the edge of the cliff, and I was by myself, absolutely quiet. And I know some of you who know me know that I believe you can learn more about the archetypes of the animals in the zoo, the zodiac. Zoidion just means zoo. You can learn more about it by studying the animals than you can by reading the textbooks. So here I was sitting at the top of the cliff, and I began to realize that there were thousands of holes in the sides of the cliff, and that crabs were coming out tentatively out of the hole, just like first a claw, and then a little more, and then more, and then they were kind of on the edge of these openings, and they were doing this with their claws. They were like click, 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 and they were just doing that in the sun. And I leaned over to see them better, and as I leaned over, the shadow from the sun on me on the cliff went over the cliff, and they all disappeared. Cancers live in fear of change. Why? Because crabs live in the intertidal zone. It's the most nutrient-rich and dynamic, changeful place on the planet. Every day the tide comes up and out and up and out. It's always changing. Cancer is a cardinal or changeable. It's an initiation. It's about initiating change. So crabs live in fear of being left high and dry or being washed away by the changing tide. And to complicate matters more, they don't have a backbone. Did you ever hear that? So can't you make a decision? Where's your backbone? Crabs don't have backbones, but they have exoskeletons. In other words, their backbone is all around them. And so our backbone isn't just about structure, it also protects our nerves. The backbone is basically the protection for our entire thinking system that we have. The communication in our body basically follows the protection of the spinal cord. Crabs have taken a different evolutionary turn. They have an exoskeleton. Crabs, cancers that we know, are mushy. They're soft-hearted. They're vulnerable. So often they have to appear invisible. See, crabs pull in. They go quiet. Sitting with a crab and finally feeling comfortable, and they're telling a joke, and gee, it's really nice, and you feel like they're coming out of their shell, and it's warm, and all of a sudden he or she looks over you and goes, and you look at them, and all of a sudden they go, and were you going to say something? No. You see, because crabs will read the dynamic changes out of fear, and they'll pull it, whoosh, gone. No feeling here, no emotion, hard as a shell. Hide behind the castle wall. So, the other thing about crabs with their hard outer shell is that not only are feelings kept inside, and there can be sometimes it's difficult for them to be vulnerable, but the other thing is that with crabs, it is a water sign, and it is emotional. But crabs actually, because they have an exoskeleton which protects them, they're still not safe enough. So they find a larger, thicker exoskeleton of another crab or snail a crustacean that's no longer using it. They crawl into that, and and that becomes their next layer of protection. But they're still not safe, so they go and they drag that under a rock or into a cave because they don't want to be washed away by the tides. That's what we use our homes and our families for. As crabs, we create those hard outer shells to protect us from the changing whims of the tides. So as the sun moves into Cancer, we all become kind of like temporary crabs for the month. And in fact, that begins, like I said, on June 21st on the summer solstice or solstice. But then just a few days later, on June 24th, the Mars follows the sun. It's now behind it. The sun over the next day separates away from Mars, but Mars is still close enough to the sun that when Mars moves into Cancer, this is kind of a bit tricky, because Mars is feisty and fiery, and Mars wants to be the warrior, and the Cancer just wants to go home. The crab wants to pull in. In fact, it's been said that the Cancerian archetype aggresses passively. You ever heard the word passive-aggressive? I don't get mad, I get even. You know, are you pissed off? No, I'm fine. Well, you seem angry. Oh, no, I'm fine. Well, stop it, I'm okay. You know, it's that sense of denial around emotions because emotions can feel unsafe if they're expressed. And especially with Mars in the sign of Cancer, it becomes difficult to keep that energy moving. And again, I think one of the practices for the next month, especially as the Sun and Mars go into Cancer, and then next month as Mercury moves into Cancer, we need to pay attention to not eating our anger. I think it was the Dalai Lama who once said that unexpressed anger is like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to die. What's that?
The Buddha said that.
The Buddha said that. Well, the Dalai Lama is just, you know, is gopher. I was going to say bitch, but I don't think I can say that. I didn't say that. Okay, so by June 24th we have Mars and the Sun in Cancer. We also have something else that occurs right around there that's very significant, and it actually is part of a larger scenario, and it occurs exactly on June 22nd, but it picks up again on June 28th, and that is that on June 22nd, Jupiter. Okay, so we talked about Venus moving into Leo, exuberant and heart-opening and expressive, and it's like the Grateful Dead song "Shine Your Love Light." You know, it's that energy of just letting it hang out and be open. Jupiter takes about a year to go through each sign. Jupiter, for the last year, has been in the sign of Leo, and in fact, in about a month and a half, Jupiter will move from Leo into Virgo. Right now, Venus moving into Leo. For a while, we have both Venus and Jupiter in Leo. So, it's important that Venus is moving into Leo. It's doubly important that Venus is moving into Leo and staying there for 4 months because of her retrograde. But it makes it even more important because Jupiter, the magnifying lens of the solar system, the planet of bigger and better and more. Jupiter, the planet that Mae West was talking about when she said, too much of a good thing is a good thing. Well, it may or it may not be a good thing. But Jupiter is often associated with good things. In fact, in ancient astrology, Jupiter was called the greater benefic, and Venus was called the lesser benefic. These were the two good planets, theoretically. However, when Venus and Jupiter came together, you could drink yourself into oblivion and die. Jupiter and Venus in the same sign, as they will be through June and July, is basically a cosmic invitation to overindulge. I'm not saying don't. I'm just saying pay attention. So as Venus moves into Leo, it's going to eventually catch up with Jupiter, and it doesn't do it until early next month. So by contract, I'm not allowed to talk about that tonight. They'll cut my pay. Wait a minute. Oh, never mind. Okay. But you can see toward the end of the month, they're getting closer and closer together. But we have something else that's going on that's really powerful, really uplifting. And if we pay attention to it, a lot of these astrological rhythms occur whether we're aware of them or not. If we're aware of them, we can simply work with them a little bit more. So, Jupiter spends about a year in a sign, which means it moves rather slowly. Uranus spends 7 years in a sign. It's an 84-year cycle. This month, Jupiter, moving through Leo, reaches on June 22nd exactly a point that is 120 degrees. Think of an equilateral triangle. It's nature's strongest geometry. It's the most stable pattern in geometry. And when two planets are trine, or triangled, they're like have superconductive wires between them. There's no resistance. The energy is just moving back and forth. And so we're getting this already. Even if we back this up, you can see, even now, back on the 3rd, Jupiter is 17, 18, 16 degrees. It's still only 3 degrees away, and you can see this blue line that represents that trine is already there. Jupiter, the planet of expansion, of bigger, better, and more, is harmonizing with Uranus, the planet of independence, of eccentricity, of weirdness, of independence, of brilliance, of futuristic stuff. And so we're getting this optimistic kind of look at what might be coming up in the future. And over through this month, and we actually have this week and next week, we have these planets in Gemini making halfway points, sextiles, also supportive to both Jupiter and Uranus. And so this whole first week or two, really like the 5th through the 10th of June, there's some astrological yummy buzz that says, open your mind, think about things that you don't normally think about. It doesn't mean you have to do everything you think, but you have to think everything you think. It's just the pattern of opening your mind does something. So, by the 22nd, Jupiter is exactly, actually even on the 20th, the moon comes whizzing through here. And as the moon comes whizzing through Leo, it's going to line up with Mercury and with Jupiter. And so that period, again, right around the first day of summer, is really important. It's really powerful. And so Jupiter harmonizes or trines Uranus on the 22nd. And then by the end of the month, actually on the 28th, Venus, which is getting dangerously close to being exactly aligned with Jupiter, moves into that harmonious trine exactly. And so the whole end of the month, we're getting this kind of buzz about potential and excitement and fun things that's really, really cool. But the Venus-Jupiter isn't exactly exact until July 1st. Can you see how Venus jumps to the other side of Jupiter there? That's in July, actually June 30th and July 1st, very cool days, because we have, and since we won't meet again before then, because this is a Tuesday, we'll meet on Wednesday, July 1st here. The fact is that on the last day of June, the moon in Sagittarius is making a temporary, harmonious, grand trine. That's 3 trines, fire, Jupiter in fiery Aries, Uranus in fiery Aries, Venus and Jupiter in fiery Leo, and the moon in fiery Sagittarius. On top of that, we got some spiritual stuff coming from the sun making a harmonious trine with Neptune. This is going to be way cooler than July 4th. You got July 4th plans the following weekend? Fine. But you can have a real party. Do what you can on Monday or Tuesday of that week. Let's quickly come back to the new moon, which we skipped over, and then we will call the month done, at least from an astrological point of view. So we have a new moon on the 16th, and let me just get the actual time here a little bit closer. There we are. It's actually at 7:05 is the actual exact time. So we have a new moon in Gemini conjunct Mars. The new moon sets the tone for the month ahead. Not the calendar month, but the lunar month. The new moon in Gemini is about mental, intellectual tap dancing. It's that whole process of thinking, of connecting dots, of basically being the the connector point, the catalyst. It's almost like being the person who's connecting other people. Gemini likes the idea of putting things together. Network, that was the word I was looking for, thank you. But with Mars there's a real sense of fieriness and feistiness. This is a powerful new moon, and yet one of the significant things about it is that it stands alone. Mercury is in Gemini. Remember, Mercury had just turned direct just a couple of days, actually on the 11th. But with all of this energy in Gemini, it's almost like it can be detached from the rest of our lives. It's not integrated. Can you see how there's no pattern that connects this to other points? But there are 2 other things of significance. One is that Jupiter is already making this trine that isn't exact until the following week. And so we have these big ideas that may not be connected with the actual stuff that we're talking about in writing. But that's okay. Just be aware of the difference. It's okay to hold 2 different perspectives. The other thing that's a little bit more interesting is this green line connecting Venus in Leo to Neptune. Neptune, the planet of imagination, dreams, and spirituality, and confusion. Isn't it interesting that the planet of spirituality and imagination is also the planet of delusion and confusion? There's food for a lot of thought. Anyhow, this quincunx, which is Latin for 5 quincunx twelfths, 5/12ths of a circle, this is an aspect of like oil and water. It's like 2 planets that are connected by one of these green lines, this quincunx. It's like they don't get along, but they can't get apart from each other. So it's like being stuck in a room with someone who doesn't know who you are, doesn't want to know who you are, and doesn't want to talk to you. You feel the same way about that person, but you're stuck together. I like to think of this aspect as the mosquito in the tent that you can't find every time you turn the light back on to try to kill it. And every time you go to sleep, you hear it again. It's annoying. And what's the annoyance here? The annoyance is between this optimistic, kind of heartfelt, expressive, playful, inner child energy of Leo, Venus in Leo, with Neptune, our spirituality. It's almost like there's a bit of disjointed energy that we can't kind of fit them together. How will this play out for you? That remains to be seen. But if you find yourself in a situation where for some reason you want to express what you feel, you're with someone you like, you want to open up your heart, and yet there's this higher, or maybe I was going to say a higher kind of sense of more spiritual love, or what's right rather than what you want and what you feel. That's one way of it playing out. Another way of it playing out is that Neptune, because it is our imagination, also can bring up things that we're afraid of. And so it may be the fear of actually being vulnerable or expressing ourselves. Regardless, this new moon is significant because it's setting a mental or intellectual tone for the month ahead. And yet, as we dig into the month, what happens is that just the day after, let me go back here to a day at a time. Just on the day after the moon moves into Cancer. And then just a few days later, the Sun moves into Cancer, and then Mars moves into Cancer. So it's almost like we're being set up to think that we can think our way to a solution, when ultimately the lesson of the month is going to be, ultimately, thoughts are great along the way, but ultimately it has to be seated not in our head, but in our heart or in our belly. And I think Cancer is more the breast than the belly. But it's that more in the body than just in the head. So, it's another month. Here you go. I think the exciting thing is that whenever we come off a Mercury retrograde, there's a sense of being kind of liberated or freed from what might feel like the chains of the past, or the chains that are just preventing us from moving as fast as we would like to. Just keep in mind that this Mars thing, that Mars Sun that we talked about, is really cooking all month, and we may want to push harder than is useful. And especially because these planets are eventually moving into Cancer, where it's not about pushing, it's more about going with the flow. You know that saying, you can't push the river, it's not going to get to the sea any faster. And so this idea of Mercury being retrograde, turning direct on the 11th, it's, even though by the 12th we might feel it, by the new moon in Gemini, we're charged up, Mars is there. However, Mercury is still moving back through territory it has already been over. And so allow yourself time to actually catch up with what your thinking is. It's not going to happen overnight, although it might feel like it. So be gentle with yourselves. We all need to be patient with ourselves as we move through this period of time. Thank you, Paul, for your attention.